Hi, this is Ulrich von Tolstat, competitive SCA Rapier fencer. Welcome to Von Tolstat Fight Club. Welcome back to Von Tolstat Fight Club. In this series, we explore techniques and principles based on Italian rapier fencing from the late 16th and early 17th centuries. Big disclaimer, the techniques we teach here are not the only techniques out there, but these techniques, which are based on the principles of Fabris and the Vienna Anonymous, are extremely effective when competing or sparring against non-compliant opponents. If you have not already done so, we highly recommend you watch episode 1 and 2 where we discuss how to close off the high inside and outside lines to our opponent's attacks. The concept in those lessons are absolutely crucial to today's focus. In this lesson, we're going to build off the techniques from episode 1 and 2 to safely step into a tag measure, gain our opponent's blade, and thrust them in opposition on the high inside line. The first thing we're going to talk about here is measure. Measure is very important. When we are talking about measure, we simply mean the distance between you and your opponent, specifically the distance where you can or can't be hit, or alternatively, where you can or can't hit your opponent. In order to attack your opponent, Fabris and the VA explain that you want to get to a distance where you can hit them by extending just the front foot in a thrust, aka a simple, moderately paced lunge. We're going to refer to this measure as ideal attack measure. It should be noted that in an ideal attack measure, you should be able to use either foot to strike, either by extending just the front foot or by passing the back foot forward, not just one foot or the other. If you can only hit your opponent with a large passing step of the back foot, then you are not in ideal attack measure. You are too far away. These types of passing attacks from outside of ideal measure are slower and more dangerous, as much more can happen in the time it takes to make these attacks. You are technically in an attack measure when you can do this, but it isn't the ideal attack measure. We're focusing on just the attack with the front foot today. The back foot techniques will be featured in later episodes. Just know that your ideal measure is when you can step and attack with just your front foot, because if you are at this distance, then you can also pass an attack with your back foot. In order to find your ideal attack measure, practice against any object or sparring partner. Work on getting to a point where you can take a simple step with your front foot, leaving your back foot planted, and strike your target. To do this, step into ideal measure with a regular full step. The front foot enters first, followed by the back foot. Make sure your attacking arm is extended as you step into this distance, and then step with your front foot to strike. Don't fling your sword arm, just extend and step to hit. When you hit, you want to just tag the target. Use the pressure required for your fencing rule set. You do not want to get a huge flex out of the blade or hit your target or opponent excessively. Also, this is not a huge, gigantic modern Olympic style lunge. These are dangerous, and if you miss your opponent, and even if you hit, you're exposed for counters. When you perform this simple lunge, be sure you use correct form. You want to step to ideal measure, extend the arm and hand, lean the torso forward a bit, and then step to strike. To recover, put weight on your back leg and bend the back knee, picking up the front foot and placing it back in its original position. We'll talk more about lunge mechanics in future episodes. For today, we'll assume you understand the basics of how to lunge and recover. We should be doing relatively moderate lunges performed by just extending the front foot while leaving the back foot planted. At no point should you feel like you are reaching hard or straining. This should be very comfortable. All that being said, ideal attack measure is exactly that, an attack measure. This is not the place to be standing still or playing around and thinking. This is where you will strike. If you need to plan, step back out of this measure, and most importantly, out of your opponent's ideal attack measure. Standing still in ideal attack measure is deadly. You are in ideal attack measure when your front foot enters into this measure. In other words, the second your front foot lands in this distance or another step from it will hit your opponent, you are there. Once the front foot lands, you are in the danger zone. In fact, Fabris says that entering this ideal attack measure is the most dangerous part of fencing. Fortunately, we have a method to enter it more safely. It's something the sources call gaining the opponent's blade. In order to gain the opponent's blade, all you have to do is close the line of attack and step into ideal attack measure. At this point again, I should mention it's absolutely crucial that you have watched episode 1 and 2 and understand how to close lines of attack in order for gaining the blade to work. That being said, if we want to gain the blade on the high inside line, we will start out of ideal measure at the point where the blade's tips are just crossing. We'll extend our point up and over our opponent's sword just outside of presence, aka not aimed at their body, but over their sword shoulder. Remember, the motions are mirrored for left-handed guards. Our arm is extended with a slight bend in the elbow, and we are in the guard between terza and quarta, just like in episode 1. At this point, you want more of your blade past less of the opponent's blade. To see what we mean, let's look at the tips. More of my sword, about 6 or 7 inches, is past about 3 or 4 inches of their sword. Because of this, I have a stronger part of my blade on a weaker part of theirs. The sword gets stronger as you go down toward your hand and weaker as you get away from your hand toward the tip. So starting from this position, we have a small advantage already. The sources refer to this initial line closure outside of ideal measure as finding the sword or stringere. As you can see, the line is closed from this position. A stronger part of your blade is crossing a weaker part of your opponent's blade. The point is aimed up and over the opponent's blade, just over their sword shoulder. Once you have placed your sword in this position to close the line, you can step into your ideal attack measure while maintaining this advantage. By maintaining this advantage, you have gained your opponent's blade as you step. By doing this, you ensure that your opponent can't hit you on that attack line as you step into measure in a single tempo. As you step into gain, your arm is still extended, your hilt is below their blade, your forte is out front to defend with the stronger part of your sword on a weaker part of theirs. You are in the guard between terza and quarta, your point is up and over their blade, outside of presence, just like in the line closure position from episode 1. You are not pushing sideways, you are giving a light pressure at most and simply closing the line with the angle of your blade as you glide in. Remember, your sword arm should already be extended as you step into ideal attack measure. If your sword arm is back at this measure, you are in danger because this places a weaker part of your sword forward instead of your forte. The weaker portion can be displaced easily, while your forte will deflect any attacks on that closed line. Now that you have come to the ideal attack measure, it's time to learn how to attack with what we call a thrust in opposition. From your ideal measure, 4 things are going to happen almost simultaneously. Your hand is going to turn into full quarta. Your hand is going to lift up so that your forte and hilt press toward your opponent's blade and trap it. You are going to take a step with just the front foot, and your tip is going to drop down into your opponent's chest. When your foot lands, the tip of your sword hits your opponent at roughly the same time. Note that your torso should be leaned forward as you attack, but not overly so. Once you have struck your opponent, recover the front foot back to its original position. As you recover, close the line. Then take another full step back out of ideal measure to the position where the tips just cross to ensure that you are out of the danger zone. So let's break it down again. The already extended hand goes from between terza and quarta into full quarta. As you are doing this, your hand will also move towards your left if you're right-handed. Note that your hand has crossed the center line. At the same time, your hand is lifting up and forward towards their sword so that your hilt and forte are pressed into your opponent's blade, almost trapping it between your blade and hilt. You can see the trap from a different angle in this shot. You should note that this is not a sideways pressure maneuver. This is more of a forward angled pressure. Also notice that your tip should be still up and over your opponent's blade, aimed outside of presence, just over their sword arm. As you strike, your hilt should be higher than your opponent's, usually just above your shoulder or at your face level in order to protect you. Your tip is still pointed up and over their shoulder, but as you step, relax your sword hand so that your tip angles down toward the right side of your opponent's chest. Remember, as the tip lands, the foot lands. So now comes the part where we talk about what we're not doing. You've probably noticed a theme in this by now, but we are not shoving their blade or giving hard sideways pressure at any time during these actions. We are also not aimed at the center of our opponent's chest, as this will release the lock and put your blade in a weaker position that is easier to parry. Instead, aim at the right side of their chest. If they do try and press the attack across, they have to take it across the entirety of their chest in order to not be hit, which is much harder to do. Aim over their shoulder to close the line and drop the tip only at the last moment as you step. You'll have to practice this again and again in order to learn the proper timing and target area. You're also not throwing your arm at your opponent. You are just stepping, lifting, and dropping the tip. Remember, only hit them with the required pressure per the rule set of your fencing organization. The way in which we gained and attacked in a straight line here is what we call the simple gain and thrust in opposition, in which we have an advantage over the opponent's blade using position of our own blade with strong on weak and the angle of the point. In future episodes, we will discuss other ways of gaining advantages and attacking as you step into ideal attack measure. In order to practice the simple gain on the high inside line, grab a partner and stand outside a measure with the tips crossing. Extend your arm and sword in the guard between terza and quarta and aim the point up and over their blade in the line closure. Keep your line closed as you step into your ideal measure, stepping with the front foot and bringing up the back foot immediately for one full complete step. Your opponent should not be able to hit you on this line in a single action if you're doing it correctly. In other words, they cannot simply extend and step and hit you on this line since you've closed it. If they try to hit you, their point should be deflected by the fact that you have a closed line. Once you are comfortable with gaining and arriving at your ideal attack measure on the high inside line, practice the thrust in opposition from this line. Cross tips to find the sword, aim your point over to close the line, step into ideal measure, lift your hand as you turn to quarta into their blade, hold the pressure at this point into their blade until the hit happens, step the front foot only and drop the tip into the right side of their chest near where the arm and chest meet. Recover back to ideal measure with the line closed and step back to outside a measure to where you started with the line closed. You can even take one more step back just to be completely safe. Your homework is to practice finding your ideal attack measure, practice gaining your opponent's blade while you get to that measure, and then thrust them in opposition on the high inside line. I'd like to note something very important. In a competition or sparring situation, your opponent will generally react to these advantages that you place on them in different ways. In future episodes, we will discuss exactly how to utilize these techniques and capitalize on your opponent's reactions to them. But for now, the most important thing is that you are able to do the techniques themselves correctly. We're building your foundations, and it will work into more advanced actions and concepts, but you have to understand the foundations before the more advanced stuff will work for you. On the next episode, we will look at ways to gain the blade and thrust in opposition on the high outside line of attack. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you next time on Von Tolstat Fight Club.